Imagine this. A man spends 2 years of his life developing a small government project. It could be a road, it could be a school building, or it could be a drainage pipeline. It could be anything. Now, this project means a lot to this man because this is a small construction company's first project. So he does everything right. He takes loans, he hires workers, he buys material, and he finishes the job. The inspection is done, the project is approved, and now the last stage of the process, getting paid. But when he enters the office, PWD, he realizes that his file hasn't even moved. Days pass, and then weeks. This man keeps going back and forth, but nothing ever changes. The clerk sitting at the desk keeps asking him to come next week, and he keeps doing that. And after a point, he gets fed up. Now, this guy was an idealist. He genuinely believed that if he did everything right, he followed the law, he followed the rules, he could survive. But his illusion was shattered, and he realizes that he's got to do what everybody else does. Pay these. Reluctantly, he pays that 8%. Now, this 8% is for the entire office, by the way. 2% for the clerk, 3% for the sanctioning officer, and the rest goes upward. That was the moment when he realized that nothing can be done the right way in this country. Corruption in India is not random. It's not just a few bad people. It's an entire system, it's a machine. Corruption in India doesn't survive despite the system. It survives because of it. So today, let's break down something that a lot of people experience but very few truly understand. How corruption actually works in India. 1. Bureaucratic friction. Now let's start with a story. A small farmer from Maharashtra needs to go to the Tehsil office to get a document, a land record correction. Now without this, he won't be able to access all the subsidies the government give our farmers. On paper, this process looks relatively simple. Go to a revenue office, submit an application, attach all the documents, and wait for approval. So one day he decides to do that, and he goes to the Tehsil office. The building is old, paint peeling off the walls, and a long line of people standing outside different rooms. He waits for 2 hours and finally reaches the clerk's desk. So the clerk barely looks up, asks him to submit his form, and then asks him to come next week. So the next week the farmer returns. He stands in the same line, waits for 2 hours, reaches the same desk, again, next week. Then the next week comes, and then the week after, nothing changes, except the farmer's expenses. He spent a lot of money on his travel, and he's lost a lot of work days, and that's important for Indian farmers. So on his 5th trip, he decides to do something different. So he approaches the peon nearby and asks him what he should do next. And here's where he gets the actual instructions. 2,000 rupees. That's the cost to get his job done. Within 3 days of paying that money, this farmer's file moves. The correction is made. The process that usually takes 8 to 12 weeks is now done within 48 hours. Now, most people would define this as simple corruption, but this is not simple corruption. This is systemic corruption. The problem this farmer just faced is called bureaucratic friction. It's when a system becomes so slow, complicated, and exhausting that people eventually start looking for shortcuts. Sometimes the friction is accidental. Outdated procedures, understaffed offices, or say layers of paperwork. But sometimes this friction becomes useful. This deliberate slowness can become urgency, and urgency creates markets. Now think about it. If the file moves smoothly and if everything had happened normally, would there be any need to pay extra? Obviously not. But when a system is excruciatingly slow, you're left with no choice. You gotta pay. Otherwise, wait indefinitely. In slow systems, speed becomes a product, and suddenly, somebody on the inside or somebody who's connected with somebody on the inside is able to solve your problems. But, you gotta pay for that. This is why corruption transactions in India don't feel like criminal acts. They feel like a workaround. Think of it as something like a service fee. In your mind, you're not paying to break the law. You're paying to escape the system. You're paying to escape its delays. And this is where corruption becomes difficult to fight. Because from the outside, the rule book is perfectly clean. The process exists, the forms exist, and the approval exists. But the real system, the system that the people have to deal with every single day, works differently. There are 2 speeds. One is the official speed, and the other is the real speed. One runs on paperwork and honesty, and the other system runs on money. And once people realize that paying a small amount can save them weeks or months of frustration, something dangerous happens. The system now has successfully trained people to stop resisting, to stop questioning. If you're street smart, you know how to get things done. You simply gotta ask, how much? And that question, simple as it sounds, is often the very first step into understanding how corruption quietly has become the part of the system itself. 2. The unofficial price list. A young man walks into an RTO office to get his driving license. Nothing too crazy. Millions of Indians undergo this process every single year. Pass the test, get the license, and get the f out of there. Simple, right? Not so soon. That's how it works on paper, at least. But the reality is, again, very nuanced. So this guy now first goes with the official route. He fills the forms, he uploads the documents, and now he waits for his driving test. A few days later, he arrives at the RTO office with the intention to give his test and pass the test. And he's practiced for that a lot. In the RTO office, he notices something. There are two types of people. One, the nervous kind, and the second are the chill ones. They don't seem to be worried at all. And just then, he overhears somebody. It's an agent trying to talk to another person, another applicant. And he is now guaranteeing this applicant that he can get his license within 10 days without even ever appearing for the test. How does that work? Right? The same thing bothered this young man. But this young man was a patriot, so he doesn't want to encourage corruption. So he goes the official route. The test begins. He follows every instruction. But halfway through the test, the officer stops him, says, "You failed." The young man is confused. What mistake did I make? The officer shrugs and says, "You stalled the car. Apply again." Now suddenly this young man realizes what the problem is. This officer is indirectly demanding for a payment. So he leaves the testing ground and he walks up straight to the person who was offering the services to this other guy before. He talks to him. "How much?" The guy says, 5,000. You don't even have to come to the RTO office. The license will be mailed to you. Don't even bother with the test. You see, this driving test was just not another test. It was exposure. It was exposing a system that works in two different ways. Two parallel paths. One path follows the official process and the other one follows an unofficial process. So this corruption has gotten so bad that now we have fixed rates. Fixed rates to getting things done. A construction permit might have a rate. A police settlement might have a rate. A municipal approval might have a rate. A license might have a rate. These prices aren't written anywhere. But if you're street smart, you know what these prices are. Citizens know, middlemen know, and officials know too. And this is what makes the system strangely efficient. Because once the price feels predictable, the transaction stops feeling chaotic. It starts to feel organized, like a fee. This is why in many places people don't even bother to ask if they need to pay a bribe. They simply ask a question. How much? How much for the file? How much for the approval? How much for the license? This is how corrupt systems that run in parallel with the official systems have now formed an official economy of their own. It's a parallel economy that runs right alongside our mainstream economy. A parallel economy that runs on favors and speed. And this system often relies onto a bunch of middlemen. These people aren't your regular citizens and they aren't your officials either. They're agents. Agents of chaos. Or should I say, agents of order amidst chaos. They stand outside government buildings, quietly guiding people through the real process. To an outsider, it might look like chaos, but to an insider, everything works with precision. Everybody knows what to do. Everyone knows their role. And everyone knows one unspoken rule. Don't disrupt the system. Because once corruption becomes organized like this, it stops looking like individual wrongdoing. It starts to behave like an informal institution. This is one of the reasons why corruption becomes so hard to eliminate. Because you're no longer fighting a bunch of bad individuals. You're fighting an entire system. You're fighting an entire market. You're fighting an entire parallel economy. 3. The hierarchy of cuts. Late at night, a truck driver is stopped at a highway checkpoint. An officer waves him to the side of the road. He asks for documents. The driver hands him over his papers. The officer then flips through them slowly and quietly frowns and says, "Overload. You see, the truck might be a little over the limit. But the fine for that violation could be huge, sometimes more than what the driver earns in an entire month. After a while, the officer slowly leans towards the window and says, "We can settle this." The driver nods quietly. "How much?" The officer says 3,000. As soon as the driver pays this amount, he's allowed to pass. To an outsider, it might look like a simple case of bribery between one driver and an officer. In systems like these, the money doesn't just stay with the officer standing on the road. A portion of it might go to the officer's supervisor. Another portion might go to the station. Sometimes collections from the night are even reported upward informally. In other words, corruption often works like a pyramid. 4. How honest people get affected by corruption. A young doctor joins a government hospital in a district town. He's idealistic, he's freshly out of college, and he chose this route because he genuinely wanted to help the underprivileged. You know, the people who cannot afford expensive private healthcare. The hospital is always crowded, patients filling the corridors. Families sleep on the floor beside the beds of the patients, and the emergency ward never seems to get quiet. For the first few months, the doctor works tirelessly. He treats patients honestly, he follows the rules, he refuses any kind of extra payment. But slowly he begins noticing something strange. Patients who come through certain hospital staff, like ward assistants, clerks, sometimes even security guards and doctors, seem to move faster. They got beds sooner. One day, this doctor overhears a conversation in the hallway. A family is speaking to a ward assistant. "Can you help us get a bed?" The assistant nods and says 500. The doctor is shocked. He later confronts this ward assistant. "You can't do this. These beds are supposed to be assigned based on need." The assistant shrugs. "Dr. Saab, you know how the system works." Unsatisfied, the doctor now complains about this whole thing to his seniors. Now, instead of anger or investigation, this doctor gets rebuke. The administrator says, "Don't bother about others. Focus on your own work." Over the next few months, the doctor notices something else. The staff who participate in these informal payments seem usually secure. They never get transferred. That is because they have strong connections inside the hospital administration. Meanwhile, a colleague of his, another doctor who openly criticized the system, received a transfer order promptly. The system doesn't just allow corruption. Sometimes it quietly protects it. And this reveals one of the most misunderstood aspects of corruption in large bureaucracies. Not everybody participating in this system is necessarily a villain. Many people enter these professions with honest intentions. Doctors want to treat patients. Officers want to serve the public. Clerks want stable government jobs. But once they enter the system, they face a reality that is far more complicated. Because corruption is seldom about greed. Most of the times, it's simply pressure. Pressure from colleagues who expect everybody to follow the same informal rules. Pressure from seniors who don't want to disrupt the system. Pressure from political influencers who benefit from these arrangements. Refusing to participate can make somebody an outsider. It can mean slower promotions, swift transfers, isolation from colleagues. So over time, some people make small compromises. A signature here, a favor there, looking the other way when somebody else collects money. And slowly, these small compromises start to feel normal. This is how corruption spreads, through institutions, through our daily lives, through gradual adaptation. People often enter the system with an intention to change it, but with time, they become one with the system. The system itself changes them. Because when participation becomes the safest path, even honest individuals bend their knee. Because resistance is simply too costly. 5. When the system keeps surviving. A young couple is trying to buy their first apartment in a growing city. They've saved for years, they've taken loans, they've signed agreements with the builder. Everything is ready. All that's left is one final approval, the property registration at the government office. It's supposed to be a routine process. Submit documents, pay the official registration fee, and get the property registered. So they arrive early in the morning at the registration office. The building is packed. People holding stacks of documents. Lawyers moving from counter to counter. Agents whispering to their clients. The couple waits in line. When their turn comes, the officer scans their papers quickly and says something familiar. There's a problem with one document. The couple looks confused. What document, they ask. The officer gives a vague answer. He says it needs verification. How long will it take? The officer shrugs. Hard to say. Maybe a few weeks, a few months. The couple, now frustrated, steps aside. The bank loan deadline is approaching. If the registration is delayed, they could face penalties. That's when a man sitting near the corridor approaches them. He doesn't introduce himself to be a government official, because everybody knows who he is. He's an agent. He glances at their document and speaks calmly. There's no real issues with your papers, he says. They ask, can the registration happen today? The agent nods slightly. Yes. He says some things need to be managed. So now the couple asks the same age-old question. How much? The agent says 5,000. Their loan might get delayed. Their plans could fall apart. So after a brief moment of hesitation, they pay that amount. And within a few hours, the documents that supposedly needed weeks for verification suddenly become perfectly acceptable. The registration was complete the same day. Now, coming back to the same question. How does the system survive? Part of the answer is obvious. Officials benefit, middlemen benefit, and there's another reason that's harder to admit. The citizens benefit too. Because corruption often solves problems that the official system struggles to handle. The formal system can be painfully inefficient, but the informal system is fast. It's flexible, it's predictable, and it skips the uncertainty. Over time, millions of people adapt to this reality. They stop expecting the official system to work smoothly. Instead, they learn to navigate the real system. Whom to talk to, where to pay, how much would it cost? It starts to feel like a part of everyday life because the system isn't just maintained by corrupt officials. It's maintained by a shared understanding between everyone involved. Officials who collect, middlemen who organize, and citizens, albeit reluctantly, who pay. Most people hate corruption. They complain about it. They criticize it. They want it to disappear. But when they find themselves standing in a crowded government office with an urgent problem to solve, many of them would ultimately ask the same question.
Hey, now before you leave, can you just drop a like and leave a comment? So that's gonna help my channel grow a bit. It's gonna help with the algorithm and stuff. I'd really appreciate it if you did that.